Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kizma. I'm Nick, and today's topic is not following the herd.
Hello and welcome to Illumination Podcast with Nick and Kizma, bringing you ancient wisdom for modern day success so that you can have the mindset to get your life and business set.
As always, thank you for tuning in. And if you're new to the podcast, take a quick second to hit the subscribe button in iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. If you want to get the inside info for this and every episode, as well as some free gifts, go to illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. And now let's dive in to get your mindset for your life and business set. Hello, Kizma.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I am doing beautifully on this podcast day.
Beautifully?
Beautifully.
That's good to hear.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Well, we're talking about following the herd today.
Herd.
Or rather, not following the herd.
Not following the herd.
So I think we'll break it down in a couple different ways. I think it's kind of important to talk about why following the herd is not a great idea. It seems like a lot of people want to do that, or it seems pretty comfortable to do that, and why that's happening, but it can create some pretty major problems in your life.
Well, did you follow the herd today at all? Or herd, I should say.
It depends on how philosophical we want to get.
Or did you follow any herd this week?
I think we all follow the herd in a certain way. Like we find our little tribe, and then we get into, like that tribe and what you do, the family things, friend things, whatever that is,
little herds,
just
big
cultural
herds.
things. Did I follow the herd when I followed the rules of the road to get here without killing anybody? Yeah, I guess I did.
Guess that's a good herd to follow.
That's probably a good herd to follow.
So perhaps we are best to start off by defining what herds are not best to follow.
Well, I would hope that you can use your common sense to figure out most of the ones that are important to follow.
Yeah, but this is the thing. I think most people are believing that they're using their common sense to know what herd to follow or not, but that is actually kind of impacting their own creativity, their own individuality, and their own lives, because they end up feeling that they have to be in this box or in this system or act like people or do what other people are doing or think like other people.
Yeah.
That's the worst. Having to think like other people, that's painful.
Well, most of the time you just don't even realize that you're doing it.
Yeah, that's true.
An important part of the conversation is just that this is what we've been trained to do.
Yeah. When does that start? Well, I remember when we were in Hong Kong and I took Zoe to put her in this Chinese kindergarten, and following the herd meant it was awfully cute, but it was a cute little uniform. Follow the herd, and then with the little backpack and the whole thing. And then she was in a Cantonese primary school, and following the herd meant standing in line, rain, sun, really intense heat outside before they went into the classrooms.
What did they do there?
They sang hymns, and it was boys in one line and girls in the other line.
Oh, pretty traditional.
Pretty traditional, following the herd.
Zoe's a very non-traditional person. How did that go?
I know. I was just thinking like, how did she bust through that? Well, it's because it became so appalling to me that I took her out and put her in international school. 2 years later, I was like, yeah, this is not going to work. And then that school was very progressive.
Yeah, these are things that are entrained into our culture, into our families, really, I think from such an incredibly young age, whether it's just your family of like, this is how you behave.
Yeah.
And you pick those things up and then you just naturally follow along, so this is the way that my folks talked about money, or this is the way that my parents treated one another. And in general, people will follow suit in some way until they decide to break out of that. And when they do, it can get really uncomfortable.
Yes.
So it starts there. And then we go through, if you went through the public school system or a similar school system in the United States, like I did, you're trained into that kind of thinking from the start. You're trained how to think about certain things. This is, you're trained to look for problems to solve, for one, which is actually really limiting in your life, because that very thing teaches you how to look for problems.
Yeah. And then you see the problems.
And then you see a bunch of problems.
Yeah.
So you're actually trained to do that. It's not like it's, I'm not trying to say that being able to spot problems and look at it, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm saying when that becomes your default to look for problems first.
What is not going to work.
Yeah, that's going to really inhibit your ability to take action. And it's going to really keep you in a lot of just locked up in your head, thinking things through and not being sure about your decision. And then you look at like, oh, well, no wonder that a lot of people struggle with insecurity about their decisions or slow decision-making, things like that.
Right.
I know I had challenges with that, and it's something I really had to consciously retrain myself to not think like that. And I still catch myself at times, you know,
exactly.
Oh, man, you're, just really getting caught in that. So these sorts of things, like this to me is herd mentality, is just trained to do it. And that's just what you do. It just becomes your default program.
Feels heavy. Now, I just want to interject, though, there's nothing wrong with creating a family culture, right? It's like the parents want to lead by example. You want respect. You want to teach the children loving ways. Like, that's a good thing. I don't think we're here to say, like, bust out all the molds and have no boundaries and no quote unquote rules or teaching guidelines. Like, that's important. But when people end up believing things about life because they've always heard it, or because the people, like you might be in an office situation where someone starts being negative and then the other person starts being negative, and all of a sudden you're swept up in the herd energy of negativity.
Yeah. You bring up a really good point, though, is that these things can be, it can be a really positive thing. You create family traditions, that way you create, all sorts of things and ceremonies that do serve people. But really, it's just the not thinking about it or understanding.
It's like anything. Just like when we have had our podcasts dedicated to Vedanta, the philosophy, it is inquire, constant questioning. I think that's what we're really getting here, because it is easy to follow the herd. It is easy to get swept up in gossip. It's easy to get swept up in the most mundane of things because everybody else is. But if you're getting swept up, make sure you pause and ask, is this really the path I desire to be on? Is this belief really going to serve where I'm going or where I desire to take my life?
Yep. Yeah, that constant, well, when I think about that, sometimes I think you can get too caught in questioning everything, just to play devil's advocate.
Okay, I get it.
We've seen these folks too, where you go way over to the other spectrum and then you get totally paralyzed by like, oh, well, now I don't know anything, right? And I can't do anything.
I got it. So I differentiate between external over questioning and the internal questioning. So when I'm speaking about the questioning, it really is going inside and asking. Like, the simple question is this for my highest and best? Is this going towards my ideal? That's an introverted question. But when someone starts doing a whole bunch of external questions, they're actually creating confusion and distraction. I'm not saying don't ask, but you will know if you're going overboard in asking questions if you are distracted from what is to be done at that required moment.
Yeah. And I think that's a really big part is, most of the times we know. We already know.
Most of the thing, everyone, most of the time we know, yet there's this herd. Maybe the herd this time is all about like dyeing the hair a certain color. Maybe the herd is all about doing drugs. Maybe the herd is about not eating, which is really tragic. Avoid following that herd. Tap in, go introvert. I mean, this is like the deep place of a spiritual quest is to look within, is to really question within.
Yeah. You don't really want to discount that need to fit in. Like, that's such a deeply ingrained human thing of like to feel loved and liked, to feel like you're a part of something.
I'm not sure I relate to that.
You don't think so?
I mean, maybe it is to me. I'm just like, what?
Yeah, I mean, to feel like a part of a family or to feel like loved, to feel like you're a part of something.
Feeling loved and feeling like you have to fit in are two different things to me.
Yes, that's true. But that's because of who you are.
Oh, okay.
I think, personally, you're unique in that way. Many times those things, and we've seen this, where you need to be a certain way in order to be in a relationship with somebody. Like, you need to, my wife needs to be me to be this way. And so I'm going to be that way. And that's how I'm going to follow it.
Codependency.
And so then it creates that codependency of like, well, this is my identity.
Yeah.
And then something changes.
Right.
And that's really, many times it takes that level of a break to get out of the herd mentality and to start to really ask those questions. And I think if there's no other point to this podcast today than just that, it's to say, start thinking now. Like, don't wait until everything falls apart. Let's start thinking now.
Ponder now. Yeah. This reminds me, I was doing some of the spiritual quests for my prosperity group, Mindset to Get Your Prosperity Set. I'm just on a roll with this prosperity teaching. And it is so true that many people will be mentally following a herd, believing things are impossible and that the world is full of lack and that failure is right around the corner.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. And
that's
so,
a good one.
And it's just, you can get swept up in that belief. It's like a collective belief or fear or anxiety or there's not enough. That's like a collective herd energy. And you definitely do not want to follow that. And it's, it takes that unique person or just someone who's going to, light their divine spark and go, wait a minute. Like, I am created of the same rich substance the universe is. I am an individuation of God, Brahman, universe, whatever they call it. Why would I be limited? Like, that's the question I want to see people asking. Why would I be limited?
Yeah. It, it kind of brings to mind for me this Facebook feed I saw. I see a lot of this on Facebook. And
what did you like that brings all that into your Facebook feed?
I click.
You got some weird stuff on your Facebook.
I do.
timeline.
I actually click on a lot of ads.
Oh,
because I'm interested, and I'm like, oh, that's cool.
I think we need to get you an alias. Oh, you have one, Salami G.
Yo, let it out. Anyway, what I saw was in this herd mentality is really prevalent. If you look at it on Facebook of everybody just piling on, this one person put out a post and she was talking about this. There was an 8-week course to learn how to do astrology readings. And one of the angles of the pitch apparently was, make some money doing it, which I think is awesome.
Cool. If you have a service and you're good at it, awesome.
But she didn't have many good things to say about that. She's an experienced astrologer. She's been doing it a long time. She's very into it and feels like, oh, well, this is, what are they going to really learn in 8 weeks? And
so it was somebody commenting.
They were commenting on the ad. Yeah. What are they really going to learn in 8 weeks? And this isn't about making money and all this other stuff. And I was like, well, that's pretty interesting. I watched that one. And then I watched.
Did you chime in?
I waited. I waited and I watched. And I watched more and more people pile on.
Oh, and say the same thing?
Just, like, you're right, and yada, yada. And what's wrong with these people and the marketers and yada, and all this stuff. And I said,
oh, that poor person just probably is wanting to build a business and help people.
It's like, and then I chimed in. I did decide to chime in, and I said, hey, what a cool opportunity for you. Because at the end of that 8 weeks, those folks are going to realize there's so much that they don't know, and they will need somebody just like you to really usher them in. Crickets.
Crickets. They shut up.
The whole feed shut down.
Yeah.
And that's when...
That was a pattern interrupt on your part.
It was, yeah. And I just that's how I play sometimes. But I just think it's kind of, to me, it really speaks to that you follow in and just fall in line with that. Man, it's like, it's so easy to hate on our government, and it's so easy to hate on, the person in charge. And it's so easy to hate on all these different things. And to get swept into these conversations, really, there are really important problems in the world, and we're talking. The news media is talking about football players, and the national. Are you kidding me?
I know.
And I'm not going to go off on a rant about that, but everybody that is herd thinking right in your face. And they are masters at dragging you into that conversation and keeping you entrained in it and just entangled with
the media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what they do.
Yes.
That is their whole job.
Yes.
And so it's, I mean, I don't want to go off on, I'm getting, okay.
It's getting hot in here in the studio,
I'm going to take a
few
breaths, but really.
I have to cut Nick's cords.
I don't want to get deeply into that whole thing. But I do want to just highlight what we're up against.
Yeah,
because
that's true. That's a good point.
There is a whole machine out there that is designed to teach us what we're supposed to think, how we're supposed to look, what a man is supposed to be, what a woman is supposed to be.
This is true.
How we're supposed to interact with one another, what real love looks like, what you're supposed to do with your life, and every other detail.
Yeah, that's true. Massive herd. Well, if we take it back to ancient times, it's the same thing. You know, there were, was it the Library of Alexandria? There were like 700,000 mystical texts that were destroyed because the sages, the saints, the metaphysicians were becoming very knowledgeable and skilled, and it made governments and leaders uncomfortable and scared. It was fear.
Yeah.
So it was like wipe out what was probably a really beautiful herd to follow, and they just wiped it out.
Yeah.
And then filled with conditioned thinking and fear and limitation. I think that for me, the biggest thing is when we follow a herd without inquiry, we're limited. We are in limited thinking. We're not seeing outside of the box or the potentiality of life.
Well, what I think is even more important about what you just said is that that's true, and you probably don't even realize you're doing it.
Yes.
That's the worst part, is that you get lulled into, well, this is just the way it is.
This is just the way that it is. Yeah. And so I would venture to say one of the red flags that all of our listeners can look for and observe is just that kind of attitude. Well, this is just what it is. This is the hand life dealt me. My job is hard. My office is negative. It's this, it's this, it's this. When we start labeling things a certain way, I think that's a good red flag that somewhere we went in the fork of the road, we turned to follow the herd instead of our own true path.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. And look for those phrases that just pop out of your mouth, you know. Life's a bitch and then you die.
Yeah,
you know,
that's one. The worst.
Can't take, thank God it's Friday. That's another one.
It is, right?
It's got kind of a party vibe to it, but it's the same kind of thing. Like, oh, you know, I get to have a life now because it's the weekend.
Yeah.
You know,
why does life stop about? During the week?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some that pop up for you?
Those for sure. For me, it's more around success. You know, people will stop when it gets hard. It's too hard. I can't do it. Or the I don't know how. You can discover how. You can. I mean, look at all the things we've certainly studied and learned to figure out our business. You can figure out how. It will take oftentimes a relentless pursuit. And being relentless is not following the common herd.
Yeah.
I think the common herd is when people just give up or stop or slow way down because they're uncomfortable. It doesn't feel right. And this might be making some of you uncomfortable hearing it. That's okay. Just ponder. We're certainly not saying think like we do or follow us or whatever. It's supposed to be one way or the other. But really go inward and ask yourself, because Nick is right. Like if you're following the herd in a certain way, you know it. You know where you're diminished. You know where you're not excelling, where you're not getting across the bridge. You know where you're not mastering something because you got swept up in a certain type of energy.
Well, intuitively, you'll know it.
Yes.
You'll feel something off, but your brain will be telling you something different.
Well, the brain is tethered to everybody else on the herd.
Yeah, and one of the really good points that you mentioned is when you don't know how.
Oh, the how. The how.
But think about that. It's something that we're trained to do. You have to know how before you can do it. And that's totally upside down, actually.
It totally is.
Like it's what's so funny about it is that it is not proven in anything that we do in practical life. When I was a little kid, I sucked at t-ball. I was terrible at it, and I really didn't enjoy it. But I don't know how to swing a bat, except you pick up a bat and then you swing it, and then you try again, and then you try. Like you do not.
And you get a little coaching from the coach.
You get some coaching and you get some help for sure. But you don't need to know how to swing a bat to take your first swing. Yeah, I didn't know how to play a trumpet.
Yeah, and you put that thing up to your face and buzz.
Yeah, they're like, buzz your lips. I'm like, okay, yeah. And then it makes a horrible noise. And I'm like, this is kind of cool.
Even a surgeon, like, of course, you're not going to put a surgeon, an untrained surgeon in front of a live person, but they have to practice cutting the skin and getting to the organs on a cadaver.
Yeah, and there's always a first time.
There's always a first time. This is really good because if we stop where we don't know how, we never get to creating the success or the self-mastery.
It's so excruciating to stay in that place too, because you know that you just want to take the step, but you don't feel quite confident enough to do it. And then you're in that in-between place. And you're
it's too hard. I can't. Nobody else is doing it.
And then what do? Is now we have the internet. So you just start learning. I'm going to learn everything I can about this or that or the other thing. And now your brain is so full of information, most of which is probably junk.
Noise.
And that's going to make it even harder for you to take action.
Yeah, because you're in a confused state.
Totally confused and totally overwhelmed with information. Whereas if you just took a step.
Yeah, the next thing. What is the next thing I'm required to do? That single pointed focus. It always comes back to this.
It does. Like, what's the next thing? And it's like, oh, well, when I go back to the first time I played a trumpet, I remember it was like 5th grade. 4th grade actually, but we were going to pick it for the next year, and they had all the instruments laid out, and I picked it up, and I was like, oh, it's trumpet, and I tried to buzz it, and it was like made a horrible noise, but I did play it for a few minutes, and I was like, okay, that I measured my results. I was like, oh, that didn't sound great, but it was kind of fun.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, well, how do I make a higher note? And so I picked it up and I tried to make a higher note, and then it made a little bit higher note, and you just keep trying it.
Yeah.
And it's like next step, you look at your results and then you take another step. And that's how things actually get done. Not by doing all the stuff and knowing everything and then just flawlessly executing. That is, I've never seen it happen that way.
You've got to experience it. You've got to turn the knowledge into wisdom through the experience, through the implementation. Really.
Exactly.
Another thing I want to point out, you said something really interesting. It was really funny before we started recording. You're like, it's a revolutionary act to think for yourself these days. And I was like, yeah, it kind of is, like this herd thing. And so where it got me thinking, we heard this story back at the academy. I forget what year it was. It was probably a decade ago. But in Turkey, there was a herd of sheep, 1,500 sheep that went over a cliff simply because sheep number 1 slipped and fell.
Sheep 0
went over. And then all of its brothers and sisters, tragic, went over. These poor shepherds were just watching their flock go over this cliff. 1,500.
Just one after the other.
Now, here's the kicker, everyone. Sheep 0 slipped. It was not, I don't mean to laugh, it's really tragic, but it was not a conscious choice for this sheep to go fly, like, hey guys, I've got wings, let's go, follow me. No, it was a slip. And so we really want to, without putting harsh judgment on people, but using our own intellect to discern who is it that we are following. Like, does this person make sense? Is the collective, maybe it's a group of friends you have or some community you're in, does this really resonate? Like, who's at the helm? Who's like, what's the energy? We've really got to look at who's running the herd before you even follow it. And I just suggest you don't follow a herd.
Yeah, but that's, you bring up a really interesting point of like the herd mentality is just, following right along. Maybe you think about a few things here and there, but you're not really looking at the direction or really looking at who's at the helm.
Yeah.
That's not to say though that we shouldn't have or follow leaders in our lives.
True. True. I mean, we love you guys following the Herd of Illumination podcast, but we always bring good stuff that's non-herdish.
Non-herdish. We're the anti-herd. And we're the first ones to tell you, don't believe anything that we're saying.
Right. Question everything.
Please, for God's sakes, do not just swallow this hook, line, and sinker.
Right.
Take it into your life and test it out and try it. Man, this is something I've found to be so important with energy work too, where you get people who are kind of like, I'm not really sure about this, or I'm not really feeling things. It's like, cool. Like, don't believe me. I've only seen it work, dozens and dozens and dozens of times, but that's me. And you need to relate to it in your way. Take it into just like anything else, take it into your life, experiment with it, play with it, try out the concept, try to freaking break it, and just see what happens from there. And that'll allow you to jar out of that kind of thinking.
Well, in the other side, I mean, to be fair too, is like I was talking to someone who she was moving into the energy spirituality realm. And I was like, oh, you might want to do, if you're interested, you might want to learn how to do this auric clearing that I teach. She goes, no, I'm just downloading everything. It's all intuitive. I don't know anything. And I was like, that is one place where, yes, you want to be an experience. Yes, you want to do it. But when you're working on other people and with other people's lives, you do want to get really high level teaching and coaching.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing, we've talked about when we had Sue B. Zimmerman on, she talked about having coaching. We've had coaching. We coach all the time. But when you're in a relationship with a coach, and my clients and students know this, question, inquire, ask, is that so? Is this pertaining to my highest and best? What's behind that? Like, that's the art of using the intellect.
And that's the essence of the true student-teacher relationship.
Yeah.
Whether it's via coaching or whether it's through actual teaching is question and discourse.
Right.
When you're not sure about something, when you have a doubt, to first think about it for yourself.
Exactly. Contemplation.
Don't just be that student that's like, well, what about this? And what about that? Well, that's called cavilling. And you can Google that word. It's just basically just nonsensical or endless questioning. But you want to take responsibility to actually really think about that for yourself and then come back with a good question,
Inquiry.
A quality question. And I think we've talked about it on the podcast, but really the essence of asking a good question.
That is the method of the student taking the knowledge.
Yeah.
Knowledge isn't given, it's taken. I mean, in some of the ancient, teachings, it's like the student would climb up the mountain to meet the guru and ask one question. And the guru would give an answer to go contemplate like for a freaking year.
Yeah. And then come back and ask one more question.
And ask one more. So the value in questioning, I think it's, for me, it's all about inspiring our listeners to be true to yourself, to not feel like you have to follow a herd. But if you have a group that you love, awesome. But be true to yourself.
Yeah. Always coming back to be true to you.
Yeah, your own divine spark, your own seed of your soul, like it's there. And if you have something to say that you're not saying because you're worried or scared what people are going to think, screw that.
Yeah. I mean, what the heck? Like, get your questions answered,
Get your questions answered.
And people like to shame around that, stupid question. And, to be fair, there are some, I won't call them stupid, but I will say silly questions. Like, people do get into silly questioning sometimes.
They can loop around, yeah.
Yeah, and they can get into kind of crazy town. But that part is a little bit a part of the process too, to recognize and to have somebody to say, that's not a relevant question. You need to ask a better question.
Yeah, formulating a question.
Yeah.
That's something we spent years studying, how to formulate a question.
Just to ask a good question.
Yeah.
So that's an important part of it, is really bringing something forth, like a question that has true value.
Yeah. So before we go, a tip. I know I have a tip running through my head. What tip do you have for people?
What tip do I have? I think we've covered the biggest tips. I would say probably one of the best playgrounds is Facebook. If you really want to observe the herd mentality.
For observation.
You just for observational purposes is just scroll down your feed and read some of the comment threads and look at the herd mentality happening there. Yeah. And it might be this herd against that herd, where people are getting into super polarization of like all these people are bad and all these people are wrong and all, and like all this kind of stuff. or it might be just everybody piling on, and just watch that. If you want to see people who are masters at training people into herd mentality, flip on your news for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
10 minutes only, everybody.
Yeah, then please turn it off.
10 minutes is plenty, but you'll see the masterful approach that they're doing at, and then recognize that is everywhere in our culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
And really start to look at the thoughts. And my biggest tip of all, absolutely, is just take a little pause here and there, especially when you find yourself stuck, and ask, I wonder why I'm thinking that.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
That's good.
And just take that moment to ponder. And you don't need to answer that question. You really don't need an answer to come through right away, but you do need to ask the question. And if it doesn't, then you need to keep asking the question.
That's
and
good.
you might not get your answer for a month, and that's totally okay.
Yeah.
What about you?
For me, I would say it is so easy to follow the herd, but it is also very boring. So step into the place that feels uncomfortable and be willing to go introvert and be innovative. Go quiet for a while, like go internal, but be innovative in what you see could actually happen, what you could create, what you could do, because that's like the pattern interrupt from the herd.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. You're like, I think to do my tip first and then do to your tip.
Yeah.
Because then you'll see it.
Yeah. You'll see what's happening. And then you just like, I'm going to pattern interrupt that one.
Yeah. And do that like a little detox. Oh man, if you're a person, I don't think we get a lot of people on the show who actually watch a lot of news, but if you're listening to a lot of media or consuming a lot, or if you're on Facebook a lot, I would highly recommend a detox.
Yeah.
A media detox. And just, focus a little bit more time on your breathing and
exercising, walks,
and doing some things, because that'll clear your head and it'll start to clean out some of those things.
Yeah.
And then you're so much more available to do what Kisma said.
And go ahead and check out Mantra Snacks. I think that's a good alternative.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So if you haven't done Mantra Snacks yet, we'll put the link in the show notes. It's the coolest thing ever. 9 audios that are just like snacks of wisdom for your soul, and you can actually listen to them over and over again. They're designed that way.
It's so funny. I forget that we have all these cool things.
I love Mantra Snacks.
The Mantra Snacks are amazing.
Yeah, and there's a Facebook group too. So we'll put the link.
Yeah, they're designed with that in mind. Yes,
Yeah,
of like
bite-sized chunks.
Jar you out of a little certain kind of thinking and into something different.
Exactly.
So, boy,
okay, then.
I could go on and on this topic.
Yeah.
But I think for now this is good, and I know that this will
Let's bring some questions in, people. Either comment on the show notes or send us an email, info@sourcemovement.com, so we can hear your thoughts on this subject of following and not following the herd.
Not following the herd. Yeah. Send it on, and it might be a comment of where you catch yourself. It might be a question about like, what's this? But please share.
Yes.
It helps everybody. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Namaste, everyone.
Namaste.
Hey, thanks for jamming with us today. And if you enjoy Illumination Podcast, please go ahead and share it with someone you love. Give us a rating, review, download our podcast. And remember, you can find us at illuminationacademy.net/podcasts. Talk to you soon. Namaste.